am New York State Conservative Party Chairman Jerry Kassar, and welcome to our bi-weekly podcast, Patriots Podium. Our show brings newsmakers, conservative political leaders, political pundits, and conservative thinkers to you as an informal conversation on their work and the issues of the day. I'm pleased to be joined by Anthony Casale, a longtime friend, really, I'd say probably over 30 years, Tony, very long-time friend, and Commissioner of the New York State Board of Elections. Tony has an extensive background in government and public affairs, having served as a member of the New York State Assembly. He was the chairman of the New York State Liquor Authority. He's been the vice president of Lynn University for External Affairs and Government Relations. And since October of 2020, he's been a commissioner of the New York State Board of Elections, one of the Republican commissioners, I should point out. Tony, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Good, thank you. Let's get right to it. We could start with the basics. What role does the State Board of Elections play in the electoral franchise, and what is your role as a commissioner?
Well, the Board of Elections, statewide Board of Elections, is responsible for the administration and enforcement of all the election laws in the state. The actual elections, as you know, are conducted at the local level. Every county has a bipartisan Board of Elections, and in the city of New York, each of the boroughs has two commissioners, and the 10 commissioners of the group become the City Board of Elections. So it's the boards of elections at the local level that actually run the elections, but it's the State Board of Elections that assists them in making sure that they follow all the rules and regs, that they have the ability to conduct elections properly, know the ins and outs of what has to be done. But also the State Board of Elections is responsible for first ballot access for anyone who runs. We have the ballot access responsibilities for any candidates whose position crosses county lines. So if you're an assembly district wholly contained, say within a county, you file your petitions and you file your activity with the county board. If you are running in a multi-county district for Senate, Assembly, Congress, whatever, you then file with us. So we do the petitioning process. We also do the petitioning process and ballot access for all the statewide candidates, the 4 statewide offices of state government, plus the 2 U.S. senators we have. So it's really an overall operation of the entire electoral process. We have a tremendous staff. The hallmark of our State Board of Elections is that we are a bipartisan board. There are 2 Republican commissioners and 2 Democrat commissioners, and it does require a majority, at least 3, to conduct business and to make decisions. We also have a staff that is totally bipartisan. They're equally apportioned among the 2 parties, and we have a tremendous staff. We are very, very fortunate to have a tremendous staff. The basic functions are administration, compliance. There is the operations, and the public information component, and the counsel's office. They do a tremendous job. They really run the operation. We commissioners are considered, quote, part-time, although there's not a day goes by that we're not either on the telephone or answering emails and working with our staff. So basically, the commissioners have the responsibility for passing the rules and regulations and setting the parameters for running the operation, setting the policies, and then the staff actually runs the day-to-day operation. Additionally, the Board of Elections, the State Board of Elections, serves as a board of canvassers. So when all of the results are in, county by county, and then they're accounted for statewide, we then come in and certify all of the ballots and all of the results. Now, there's another twist that's a little bit of, I'm carrying on here, but as you know, this is the first year that New York State is administering its public campaign finance law, in which public money is being made available to candidates for the state legislature. And the 4 of us, the 4 commissioners, plus 3 additional people, serve as a 7-member board of the Public Finance Board. So that's an additional responsibility for us. But basically, it's almost everything involved with operating the election law, the processes, if you will, and then, of course, enforcing the rules.
So a tie vote basically just means, because I'm sure there are lots of tie votes, basically nothing goes forward on a tie vote between the two Dems and
Yeah,
two
but
Republicans.
when it comes to setting policies and when it comes to passing rules and regulations, we've had very little tie votes, if you will, because we try to compromise, we try to work together collegially to get the thing done. But for the most part, I don't think we've ever. Well, if we have a tie, that means you got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
So to avoid that, what we try to do is have a nice discussion first at the staff level and then at the board level ahead of time to ensure that there is some type of agreement before we go forward.
So if this actually brings up a point, which I think there's something of a public misunderstanding. Um, I guess it was last year. You all, through I guess discussion, compromise, and finally agreeing, gave permission to local boards to look at other voting systems, but you all did not institute a different set of machines or whatever. You just gave permission, if I recall correctly.
No, it's more than that, Jerry.
Okay.
Every piece of equipment, every type of voting machine, every type of software, all of that has to be approved by the State Board of Elections.
Right, but you don't make them buy. You don't make them buy it. That's their.
No, what we do.
Okay.
If a vendor wants to sell something to New York State, they have to come to us first.
Right.
And the testing process is very intricate. We use, if it's a piece of equipment, there's an outside laboratory that's engaged to do an analysis. And then within the State Office of Technology, there is a state agency that reviews, that does the analysis, plus our internal staff. When that process is completed, reports are gathered, it comes to the board. So everything you see at an election site has been approved by us. We don't mandate which machines to buy. We basically provide the list of what's there, and the counties decide which machines to use, which poll pads to use, what type of software to buy. It's all done by the counties. And that involves the county boards of elections working with their county IT departments to ensure that it's a compatible system.
Good. Thank you. That does clarify somewhat what I was questioning. So, as you alluded to before, there are two semi-autonomous parts of the state board. One handles enforcement, which is a little different than compliance. So I wanted to ask you about that. And the other handles the new public finance law, which you've explained the role of the commissioners as part of the larger monitoring group or group that oversees that. So let's talk a little bit about this enforcement division and how it's different from the compliance division and how you all interact with that.
The compliance division is where you file your campaign spending reports. And it's the compliance division that works with candidates and committees to ensure they know the rules, they know the filing requirements, and helps them file their documents. However, if someone fails to file, or if a complaint is received about someone's filing, that goes to the director, the Division of Election Law Enforcement. It's a separate entity. There's a separate individual who is appointed directly by the governor, who has his own separate operation. He's actually under the Board of Elections, but he's not part of the board in terms of decision making. He's basically an independent overseer. He does have to come to the board for certain things like subpoena powers and other and referrals, but for the most part, it operates independent. But he reports back to the board on a regular basis on all the cases that he's handled, whatever he has, any settlement agreements he's made, any cases he's dismissed. He provides the board a report, and then all of his reports eventually become public record and are available on our website.
Where does his budget come out of?
It all comes out of the State Board of Elections budget. He submits his budget. We submit it to the budget division, the governor's office, and of course it's passed by the legislature. The budget is so we operate. So we even though it's a separate office, the enforcement office, personnel matters. He has the ability to hire and fire within his own office. But we handle all of the overhead, so to speak, the office space, the payroll, all that kind of stuff is done by us, and budget. Our two co-executive directors actually submit the budget on our behalf to the legislature, which includes the budget for the Public Campaign Finance Board, for the Board of Elections, and for the Division of Election Law Enforcement.
Okay, thank you. So, look, in the hopes of increasing voter turnout, which seems to be the daily conversation with the Democrats, anyways, in state government, there have been a number of changes implemented by statute in the past several years, really since the Senate went into Democratic control. The Conservative Party has been supportive of early voting in person, but we've strongly been opposing mail-in voting, believing it will increase fraud. What are your thoughts on mail-in voting?
I'm not in favor. Well, first of all, the mail-in voting law that's currently on the books is being challenged in court because we feel it's nothing more than an extension, we meaning the Republicans, that it's an extension of absentee voting, and absentee voting has certain parameters set in the Constitution as to who qualifies for an absentee. So we've opposed it on the sense that the legislature did not act properly, did not act with proper procedure in enacting that. The problem is, the situation is this. We now have early voting in New York for a number of days prior to election, besides the in-person voting, and we've made it even easier for in-person voting because all of the poll sites are handicapped accessible, all new machinery, equipment, and so forth. We have early voting, as I said. We have mail-in voting. We have absentee voting, and yet the total number of votes cast doesn't really go up that much. Now, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second, Jerry.
Please.
I think if people aren't voting, it's not because they don't have accessibility or opportunity. People don't vote because I think a lot of people are just turned off of what's happening both in Albany and Washington and just don't want to participate. That's more than half the problem as far as I can see personally. But as far as the mail-in voting and no excuse voting, if you're going to do it, you got to do it properly. And my answer is you have to amend the state constitution, which requires approval of the voters.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm glad you're expressing that. That has been an argument. I mean, I want to just say this to you because I'm obviously a New York City guy. Prior to even the early voting in person, which, like I said, we can support, I always thought it was somewhat ironic that a person could leave their house in the morning to go to work, walk very likely right by a polling site, get to work, spend the day at work, and come home and walk by a polling site. And if a campaign contacts them, they're likely to say, well, I'm ready. I'm going to go out later. And they've already walked by the polling site twice. And this is extraordinarily common in New York City and probably in Nassau and to some degree Westchester, like in the Yonkers area. Now, I recognize that's not a true review of what things look like statewide, but I've always found the low turnout in New York City exactly reflective of what you're saying. People just don't care.
No, they shouldn't.
They get the government that they deserve.
Right.
You know, as it's been said
I agree. I think people are very turned off. And I think right now people are really upset over what I would call the lack of civility in government, the lack of camaraderie, and the lack of compromise.
Well, I will say this. You were actually in the state assembly for quite a while, and you had, I didn't go through the whole list. I didn't have that much time, but you had, a history with the United States Congress, other roles. You've been a senior advisor to the state GOP. I mean, you in particular have spent a great deal of time working with people. I remember very clearly that we worked very closely when I was working in the state assembly with anyone that had an interest in better government. And then if we had to, play hardball or something, that was something for the specific day, the specific session. You were the chairman of the program committee, am I correct?
Correct.
For the GOP.
Yeah.
So you in particular were developing policies to advance the State Assembly Republican Conference at the time. And I'm sure you have many a story of how you did work closely with the speaker and the majority. Because I remember in those days, it was not assumed that the Democrats would stop something simply because it was a Republican idea.
Oh no, not at all. As a matter of fact, I was at a reunion, assembly reunion Monday night, annual event,
Yeah.
and I was talking with a former colleague of mine who happens to be a downstate person, and he happens to be of the opposite party. And we got talking about what's happening currently in both Albany and Washington. He said it used to be we had governing season and then we had political season, and we fought like heck during political season, but we worked very closely together during the governing season. And those days, unfortunately, I think are gone. I think the lack of compromise, and more recently, Jerry, just as a personal aside, I recently we moved our home, and I was forced to take a lot of files I had in my basement and move them to my office. And long story short, I've been going through files that are sometimes 25, 30, 35 years old on different projects I had worked on, different pieces of legislation. And invariably, all the major things I worked on over the years, transportation, environment, tourism, they were all bipartisan. I remember vividly the conversations I had with colleagues from the other side of the aisle. Remember, I was in the minority in the assembly. The majority party had some great leaders, especially from the upstate area that I worked with. But we got things done. We fought like crazy when we had to. We argued when we had to, and we debated everything. But at the end of the day, we were still human beings and we were still friends. And they don't have that. I don't sense it. Now, maybe I'm not there every day. Maybe it exists among some people. I know there's some younger people starting a group in Albany now that's kind of a younger group of legislators to get things done. I don't know if it's not a no labels thing, but I'm not sure that's what they call themselves, but you may be familiar with it. But the newer members of the legislature, I think, are the people we turn to ensure that we go back to, it doesn't have to necessarily be bipartisan, but it's got to be collegial.
Yeah, I mean, there was and you knew him. He was an assemblyman, then a senator, and a judge, Chris Mager. He used to tell me, to lived up the block from me, so I used to see him all the time. He used to tell me that, out of a 24-month cycle, there were 3 months every 24 months, which were completely the silly season. But the other 21 months, you were governing, you were trying to do what's best for everyone, and you just weren't. It just didn't work that way. Now, Republicans and Democrats do think differently, and it doesn't mean they're going to end up at the same, location at 6 p.m. at night for dinner. But they did care about less about politics and more about, the citizens.
Right.
So let me go. It's a shame. Let me go through a couple of other areas. The Conservative Party has expressed that we are uptight with the limitations that have been put in place on attorneys and even the Board of Elections being able to challenge mail-in voting and absentee voting, because bottom line is, a few years back the process was changed so that for the purposes of having a conclusion on an election sooner, local boards of elections are opening ballots before actually election day, and supposedly everything is kept very secretive. But the fact is, once the ballots are open, to actually challenge something that comes in the mail would seem less than likely. We think that is another. We think that also is another way to cause a higher likelihood of fraud. The fact that attorneys and other interested groups cannot really challenge or look at this stuff. Where does the board have a position? Do you have a position on this?
The board is actually split on this. My colleague Peter Kaczynski and I, the two Republicans, have supported the lawsuit that was brought. It was just decided in state Supreme Court in Rochester recently that at least a portion of that new law is unconstitutional. It's going to go up on appeal. I agree with you. First of all, the system we had in place for years, and I've talked to some Democrat colleagues who agree that that was a good system for many, many years. The system provided, number one, for transparency. You were allowed as a candidate or a committee or a party leader to at least look and see what was being done. They still let you look, but you can't talk. Second, it's the people on the ground who might find discrepancies. people on the ground who can say to a Board of Elections commissioner, hey, we know that this person is not registered where they say they are, or we think that this guy voted someplace else, or this person wasn't really out of state when they say they had an absentee ballot. And then when the ballots are opened, to ensure that they're properly marked. But they're going to be opening them every 3 days. In the way it used to work, the second part of that, which the court just struck down, if a ballot was challenged, the two commissioners would have to agree either to okay it and count it, or to put it into a separate box to be taken to a judge to decide. That was taken away. And then when the whole process at the board was ended, candidates or other aggrieved parties could go to court. That was taken away. Basically, what Judge Doyle in Rochester just decided: number one, you can't have a tie vote be a yes. Both parties have to agree. That's the bipartisan nature in our Constitution of this process. And then, secondly, the legislature has no right to take away your right to go to court. So let's see where it goes on appeal. But I would agree with you. The system we had in place was fine. Yeah, and it says it's going to give you quicker results on election night. But you still have to wait an entire week for mail ballots to come in and for military ballots to come in to be counted. So there's no way election, unless it's a lot of elections are decided on election night anyway, because even just on the machines, there's a wide margin. A close election can't be decided on election night anyway, because you have to wait a week for the rest of the ballots to come in and then have them counted individually.
See, I never really understood. I can understand you not wanting to be still counting ballots in January, and I know of very, very few situations like that. But I've never really understood it's almost like the media and some of the public want to simply criticize because it takes a while, not understanding that it's better to have a true, accurate result than to, push the envelope this way. But this brings in another issue. Why not have voter ID? I mean, why not show up with identification?
Jerry, you know as well as I do, you can't go any place today without showing your ID. You can't check into a hotel now without showing your ID. You can't go into a public building. You can't go into a state office building without showing an ID.
But you can vote.
Obviously you can't get on an airplane. Everyone has an ID, and if you don't have a driver's license, the government can issue a non-driver's ID. It was funny the other day. My grandson, who's in high school, was on his cell phone. There was a piece of paper stuck in. I said, "What's that?" He says, "Oh, that's my hall pass. It's my ID for school. So if I'm in the hallway, I can show. If they ask me who I am, I can show my ID. That I have the ability to go from room to room." You go to a public school today. The teachers are all wearing badges. Everybody has to show an ID. Who are you? So I just think it's ridiculous. And there are many states that require it, but I think that would solve 99% of any alleged fraud problems if people had to show an ID.
Well, Ohio just did a review and an analysis, and they have proven that there are in their state, non-citizens and illegal immigrants. Or I shouldn't say, they are illegal as far as I'm concerned, but the reality is the nation looks at them as at least the federal government looks at them as asylum seekers, but they're illegal immigrants, popped up on the rolls. And because, in New York State, we've long ago now really have allowed through the motor voter and the DMV a lot of opportunities to get your name on the voter rolls, which strikes me that we are pushing one side of the envelope, but we're not pushing the other side. And if we were, some of this stuff could actually be, you could probably be okay with some of this stuff if you knew everyone had to show an ID when they showed up.
Right.
Because that would be the secure way.
We do run a cross check after election. when every county uploads to the Board of Elections the name and date of birth of everyone who voted, it's cross-checked at the state level to be sure that on that particular day, you did not vote twice. But it still is no way of knowing if the person only voted once, if they were really legally entitled to vote.
And that's what I think Ohio. I mean, Ohio was very clear. It was not an enormous number, but frankly, I mean, what am I going to say? Well, somebody, one burglary means that's okay. I mean, it's just not. That's one is too many. But so how secure are New York State elections?
I think for the most part, we're pretty secure. As I say, we're secure in the sense of people voting twice. I think we're fairly secure as far as the counting of the ballots. But the one thing I don't know we can say for certain is, are the people who are voting truly allowed to vote? I think for the most part, yes, but there's going to be some gaps there. But the counting system is fairly secure in New York, as far as I'm concerned.
So I guess it's not directly a Board of Elections issue, but it's definitely an issue for the people of New York State. The state legislature changed local elections. Outside of cities, they've changed local elections from the odd years to the even years. It doesn't start for another, I guess, 2 years, but they've changed that. We are extraordinarily opposed to this, the Conservative Party, for a variety of reasons, not least of which is a belief that these local elections are going to get lost in terms of issue conversations.
Right.
Does the state board have a position on this, or do you have a
Not the
position?
state. We have no position per se. However, we did opine. My colleague Peter and I did let the governor know our concern. Number one, there's no cost savings because you still have to run local elections because they didn't cover in the so-called constitutional officers like your upstate, like county clerk and district attorney, and the judges. Their elections are based sometimes on their age. So every year you're going to have an election for a judge someplace, and then the other concern is the voter turnout. If you look at any election results from top to bottom or left to right, you're going to see that almost everybody who votes will vote at the top of the ticket for governor, say, or for president, U.S. senator, but it dwindles down. Now, right now, in where I live in a small county upstate, this year, you're going to have statewide office of U.S. senator, and then you're going to have a member of Congress, a state senator, an assembly member, maybe a county clerk, or maybe another. Okay. But then you go down the list. If you add in there the mayors or the town supervisors, at the town level, upstate New York, you've got a supervisor, at least 2 councilmen run every year, a town clerk, sometimes the tax collector. You're going to end up with a ballot that's wider than you can imagine, and people are not going to vote all the way down. The other thing is, let's say I'm a citizen of a small town in upstate New York, and I'm really concerned about, say, development. And I want to ensure that becomes an issue in the campaign. I want to know where my candidates stand on development. How much attention are they going to get on a local issue when everybody's focusing on who's running for president, who's running for governor? They're not going to be paying attention. So the local issues are going to get overwhelmed by the national and statewide issues, and they're not going to be the focus. We set this up intentionally many, many years ago.
Yeah,
for local elections, so that there can be some focus on it. It's not a good idea at all.
Well, it is being challenged. I know that there is a belief, and I share this belief, that in counties that have charters, and every county in the state does not have a charter, but counties that have charters that come under different sections of the state constitution because of that, home rule issues, that they would be that they would have a good argument. Ironically, at the same time, the Democrats are now looking to expand this into places like New York City and Buffalo, which I got to be honest with you, to have New York City council elections on the same ballot with state assembly elections, which would be just ridiculous in terms of candidates discussing issues.
Right.
And then other places, like you take a Steuben County, for example, and I use this, Steuben County, for the people watching, is considered an unorganized county in the Conservative Party. So that means that the state Conservative Party um, authorizes to be on the ballot Republican candidates. And we worked very closely in Steuben with the party chairman. There are something like 170 local elections in the off year in Steuben County, because I know it because we do them here. Imagine those 170 elections. Obviously, they're not all county-wide, but imagine all those elections making their way onto the ballot in the off year. It's going to create a ridiculous ballot in many towns. Totally ridiculous. Hormel's got a chamberlain. It's got like 9 council members. It's got a clerk.
Right.
They're all elected. Hormel could end up with a ballot with 20 different people on it. I mean, that just makes literally no sense.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's all over the state.
Yeah. That one just comes to mind because
Right.
I talked to so many people there. So Tony, I want to thank you. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
No, I just want to thank you, Jerry, for the great job you're doing for your party, and I want to thank you for the opportunity and let people know that the hallmark of our election process in New York is a bipartisan board of elections at the state and county level, and it should be kept that way. If you look at what's happened nationally and where they're complaining about elections, both Republicans and Democrats, there are states when there's a sole person in charge. We've had this process now. This is the 50th anniversary of the New York State Board of Elections. We're very proud of that this year. Since 1974, we've had bipartisan board at the state level, and we'd like to keep it that way, and we'd like public support for that.
Well, thank you. Once again, I do want to thank my old friend, New York State Board of Elections Commissioner Anthony Casale, for taking the time to be with us. I would also like to thank Katie Mohan and Andrew Davis for making this podcast happen. A group called a service called FeedSpot that rates podcasts regionally placed Patriots Podium 31st among the thousands of podcasts that originate in Brooklyn, New York. I have no idea how we work out in the statewide, but I was a little surprised by this when I saw this the other day, and I think it's a tribute to our little team. Once again, you've been watching the Conservative Party's podcast, Patriots Podium, and I am Chairman Jerry Kassar. Thank you.